Alright, we're going to pick up on the next lab topic, which is acid-base balance and buffer systems. So this is found on page 97 of your packet, looking at acid-base, and there's also some handouts that I've included. 95. I've also included some handouts in the attachment on Blackboard to help you with the case studies and the worksheets that come with this lab in case you didn't get them in lab. So looking at, first of all, the normal range for pH of blood and body fluids, if we look here, the normal range is 7.35 to 7.45. So that's considered normal, slightly above water, neutral, which would be 7. So anything that is less than 7.35 would be considered acidosis, and anything greater than 7.45 would be alkalosis. So less than 7.35 and greater than 7.45. So to keep our blood within this narrow range of 7.35 to 7.45, we have what we call buffer systems. And buffer systems basically can absorb or take up excess hydrogen ion or release hydrogen ion depending on the needs of the body, if we're acidotic or alkalotic. So just kind of depends on what's happening. But there's 3 different types. The bicarbonate buffer system we talked about quite a bit. That happens inside the red blood cell, and also is where carbon dioxide, I should say, is converted to bicarbonate ion. And then remember that bicarbonate ion leaves the red blood cell and is found in the interstitial fluid. So the bicarbonate buffer system is really the only extracellular fluid buffer system we have. So very, very important buffer system, very common buffer system using bicarbonate ion. So it's active in the extracellular fluid and to a small amount in the intracellular fluid. So, but it's the only one that we find in the extracellular fluid. So that's the important one to remember. The protein buffer system, this is due to proteins that we find inside of our cells. And also we find some protein in the urine that helps with buffering, and that uses the ends of the protein structure, which is a carboxyl group and an amino group. The amino group can, if we look down here, there's a picture, I believe, or maybe it's in your textbook. Oh, it's in your textbook. In your textbook on page 1005, you'll see that if pH gets high, we see the carboxyl group will release hydrogen ion, and as a result of hydrogen ion being increased or being released from the carboxyl group, that is going to bring pH down. And the opposite is true for the ammonium ion. Going back up here, we're looking at the ammonium ion, NH2, we can see that that will bind excess hydrogen ion, and that can bring pH up if we're in an acidic situation. So depending on what the conditions are in the body, these proteins can either bind or release hydrogen ion from one end of the protein molecule. So this, we find phosphates in the urine, and also again in the intracellular fluid. So this is a buffer system that is active in those 2 areas, the urine and the intracellular fluid. So be sure that you know the compartments where these buffers are acting. So the first one we said, bicarbonate, was extracellular fluid. This is intracellular fluid and urine. And the number 1 system is the phosphate buffer system inside cells. So this one does act inside cells as well, but the phosphate buffer is a very powerful one inside of our cells. So it's the number 1 buffer system inside cells. And again, you're just taking these phosphate ions, and they are taking up excess hydrogen ion or releasing hydrogen ion from these phosphate molecules. And that again is shown on page 1005 on the bottom left. If we take a salt of these phosphates, so we have sodium hydrogen phosphate, and that will soak up excess hydrogen from, say, like hydrochloric acid, and resulting in a weak acid and a salt. So anytime we form a weak acid, we talked about in lab that weak acids stay together. They don't dissociate. The ions don't dissociate, so it ties up that hydrogen ion, and that's going to protect the pH from going too low. So again, that's active in inside cells, intracellular fluid. So then we're going to look at different types of acidosis and alkalosis. So when you look at these general terms, just think of as what is the cause. If somebody has respiratory acidosis, that means there's something with the respiratory system that is causing acidotic conditions. And you know, one of the main phrases to remember from advanced A&P is CO2 makes acid. So if somebody has poor CO2 diffusion out of the respiratory system, out of the, let's say out of the blood, for example, it doesn't diffuse out of the blood because there's something wrong with that respiratory membrane. CO2 builds up, and as a result they have respiratory acidosis. So it's something wrong with the lungs that is causing respiratory acidosis, causing that pH to drop to less than 7.35. Metabolic acidosis is an acidosis, it's an acid condition with the blood less than 7.35 that is not related to the lungs. For example, it might be due to strenuous exercise producing a lot of lactic acid. It might be due to starvation, which is breaking down protein and fats and releasing those keto acids. It might be related to diabetic ketoacidosis. So it's unrelated to the respiratory system. It's something else is causing that acidosis. And the same is true for respiratory and metabolic alkalosis. When we look at respiratory alkalosis, again, that means that we are getting rid of CO2 too fast. So we talked about that could be a cause, say, maybe from hyperventilation. So we're losing too much CO2. We don't have enough to keep our pH down, so pH starts to rise. So I've made this nice little chart for you here. If I can find where I put it now. Where did I go with it? Here it is. This is posted for you on Blackboard, and it's a nice little flow chart that's going to really help you look at blood gases, and here's the normal values that we would see in a typical blood gas, and it's going to help you determine if the patient has acidosis or alkalosis, and if they do have, say, alkalosis, is it respiratory or metabolic? Is the body compensating for that, trying to fix it, or is it not compensating for it and just, you know, kind of going down in ability to compensate? And what are some causes of that? So it's a nice little flow chart. You start at the top. So first of all, I look at my plasma pH, and if it's higher than 7.45, then I go this way. I say that they have alkalosis. What type of alkalosis do they have? I look, is it respiratory or metabolic? I have to look at these values. Is the pCO2 low? If it is, then it's a respiratory. Is the bicarbonate high? If it is, then it would be metabolic. So I can just kind of go down the flow chart here and determine what might be the problem. So we're going to be referencing this worksheet as we look at the case studies today. So we're going to look at the first worksheet, and we'll start at the bottom here. So if I look at just this chart here, I can see right away 7.32. I know that that is less than 7.35, so that's acidosis. And here I see 7.48, that's higher than 7.45, so that's alkalosis. Number 3 would be alkalosis. Number 4, acidosis. And number 5, normal pH. But now if we look at the values for the pCO2 and the bicarbonate ion, pCO2 levels, and looking at the worksheet, whoops, going the wrong direction here, looking at the worksheet for pCO2, pCO2 should be 35 to 45. So I can go and look and see that's a respiratory. And so if the respiratory system is not a cause of this dysfunction, that should be a normal level. So 35 to 45. So here we have a normal respiratory. So it must be a metabolic acidosis because is the HCO3 in the normal range? We look, HCO3 should be 22 to 26. So the higher it is, the more basic. Remember, that's a buffer. Bicarbonate ion is a buffer. So the higher the value, the more basic it's going to try to make that solution. So the pH should be higher as a result. So the fact that it's low would tell us that what we have here, for this one, we have a metabolic acidosis because the PCO2 is normal. It's not the lungs causing it. It's something in metabolism causing it. So the bicarbonate ion is low, so we have a metabolic acidosis. Looking at the first one here, again, we see a high PCO2. We know CO2 makes acid, so that means we have a respiratory acidosis here because it's the PCO2 that's causing the low pH. The next one here, we look at this, we can see, again, we have a high PCO2, but we have a somewhat normal bicarbonate, and we have a high pH. So this one's a little tricky because we can see that we have high pH, so that's an alkalosis, but we have a low PCO2. So a low PCO2 means we're losing a lot of carbon dioxide through the respiratory system. Sorry, so this 7.48 is a alkalosis, but we have a low PCO2, so that means that we are not hanging on to carbon dioxide, which we know carbon dioxide makes acid. So if we lose acid, we're going to have a higher pH. And the bicarbonate ion is in the normal range, so this would be a respiratory alkalosis. This would be a respiratory alkalosis because the PCO2 is the abnormal value causing, the low PCO2 is causing the high pH. And the next one, the abnormal value here is the bicarbonate ion. The bicarbonate ion is high, so therefore this is and the PCO2 is normal, so therefore this would be a metabolic alkalosis, which means we are reabsorbing bicarbonate ion, or we are, well, we won't talk about the causes yet. Let's just stick with just looking at the numbers. So this is a metabolic alkalosis because it's the bicarbonate ion that is out of whack. And the next one is an acidosis, we said, and the acidosis is again a metabolic acidosis because the bicarbonate ion is low, the PCO2 is normal, so it's not the lungs causing the problem, it's the low bicarbonate ion, so that would be a metabolic acidosis. And this one is normal, but we see that this is high and this is also high, so this is kind of a unique situation that we actually have one of these is compensating for the other and keeping it in the normal range. And we're going to talk about how that happens in just a little bit. So this would be normal pH. Okay, so let's look at the worksheet first. And looking at number one, looking at pH, that would be letter K. It's a measurement of our hydrogen ion concentration. Any substance that minimizes shift in pH, we call that a buffer. And that carboxyl and amine group, that is a protein buffer system. A substance that accepts hydrogen ion, that is a base because it takes the hydrogen ion out of solution. And these two phosphate ions, those are part of the phosphate buffer system, letter J. Any substance that donates or releases hydrogen ion, we call that an acid. And this is bicarbonate and bicarbonate, or carbonic acid and bicarbonate. That's part of the bicarbonate buffer system, letter A. In a solution with low pH, that's an acidic solution, anything less than 7.0. And a solution that's equal to 7.0, letter L, we call that a neutral solution, which is what water would be. And if we have a blood pH less than 7.35, that's again what we call acidosis, which means it's lower than normal. And a solution with a pH above 7, that would be F, basic or alkaline solution. A blood pH in the normal range, we just call that normal, homeostasis, letter G. And then a blood pH above 7.45, that would be letter I, alkalosis. And the most quickly responsive extracellular buffer, that's going to be our bicarbonate buffer system. We said that's the number one extracellular buffer system. And the most responsible for buffering capacity in the plasma and the interstitial fluid, that's letter H, the protein buffer system. Remember, we have the albumin and plasma proteins in the plasma to help buffer. And then important in the intracellular compartment and in the urine, that's letter J, the phosphate buffer system. So let's look at some of these conditions here that might cause the different types of acidosis. And to examine these, it's good to look at this handout that I gave you. If we look at what might cause pH to be high for respiratory alkalosis, is hyperventilating due to anxiety, pain, exhaustion. That's going to cause us to lose CO2. Therefore, our PCO2 would be low, and that's going to bring pH up. If we have metabolic alkalosis, if I took a bunch of antacids, or if I lost hydrogen ion due to prolonged vomiting, that would cause my pH to go up, and that's not related to the lungs, it's related to something in the body, so that's why that would be a metabolic alkalosis. Respiratory acidosis, if I'm not breathing well, CO2 is building up. So with any of these people with lung disease or medication, drugs, CO2 is building up in the body. They're not breathing it off. They're not blowing off CO2. We know that CO2 makes acid. So that would be an example of a respiratory acidosis because the lungs are the reason why that PCO2 is building up. Metabolic acidosis would be, again, anything that affects the bicarbonate ion. So severe diarrhea, we lose bicarbonate ion in the diarrhea. Diabetic ketoacidosis is, again, it's going to cause that breakdown of fat and muscle, releasing ketones, which are acids, and will cause pH to go down. And then excessive exercise or seizures is a buildup due to lactic acid. So all of those are examples of metabolic acidosis. So going back to our worksheet then, if I have a patient with emphysema, that's a lung problem. And remember, they can't exhale properly, so they build up CO2, so that would be respiratory acidosis, letter B. Prolonged vomiting, we're losing hydrogen ion from the digestive tract, so that would cause pH to go up. That's a metabolic alkalosis. If I ingest too much aspirin, again, I'm bringing in an acid into the body, so that would be metabolic acidosis. If I overdose on an antacid, that would be metabolic alkalosis. Prolonged diarrhea, we talk about if we lose a lot of bicarbonate ion, that's going to cause a metabolic, going back to our worksheet, diarrhea, we talked about here. Severe diarrhea, that would be a metabolic acidosis because we lose the ability of bicarbonate to suck up the excess hydrogen ion. We lose part of that buffering system, so that's going to cause a metabolic acidosis, letter A. Hyperventilating, we talked about, that's a respiratory alkalosis. And a patient with uncorrected diabetes mellitus, that is another example of a metabolic acidosis because breaking down ketones, releasing acids. Person is compensating for hypoxia while backpacking at Pikes Peak, so that means they're going to be breathing very heavily, hyperventilating essentially, and as a result of hyperventilating, they are going to suffer from a respiratory alkalosis, which would be letter C. Patient with overdose of drugs that depress the respiratory control center, that means those CO2 is building up, so they're not breathing correctly, and that would be a respiratory acidosis, letter B. Anytime we have CNS depression, coma, or stupor, drowsiness, symptoms of that, those are all symptoms of a respiratory acidosis, so letter B, as well as a metabolic acidosis, letter A. And when we see nervous, muscle hyperexcitability, possible seizures, that's an example of a respiratory or metabolic alkalosis, so letter C and D on the bottom. So in the next video, we'll pick up and look at the case studies related to the different values. But I'm going to stop the video at this point and pick up with that in the next video.